Goeiedag, mijn naam is Evan, ik ben immigratieprocureur here in America, en ik wil je helpen om immigratiewet te verstaan. Now, if you're new to the channel, please remember to like, subscribe, share this video. If you are already a subscriber, consider becoming a channel member, because that really helps the work that I'm trying to do here, which is to help Afrikaners navigate the refugee program, to help Afrikaners who are currently here in the United States navigate the asylum process, and to educate Americans on the ongoing and continuous persecution of Afrikaners in South Africa. So consider becoming a channel member if you haven't already. Now, I wanted to talk about this because I had gotten a lot of messages and I saw that Colonel Wyatt had made a video. So just to piggyback off of his analysis, to make sure that you truly understand that this article that came out, this news story saying that the Trump administration has ordered a review of Biden-era refugees, something around 230,000 refugee applicants President Trump's administration wants to review, and these are refugees who were brought over during the Biden administration, that this has nothing to do with your refugee program, your refugee status, Afrikaners who are seeking asylum here. Pretty much this is a giant nothing burger when it comes to having any implications on you as an Afrikaner seeking relief and protection here in the United States. That being said, the question then has snowballed into, well, what happens with the next administration, and what is the Trump administration looking to do with these 250,000 Biden-era refugees? Well, let's understand something that I've talked at length here on this channel, and Colonel Wyatt said it as well in his video. Now, we're both saying the same thing. There was one email that I should have pulled it up for this video, but I forgot. Where they were a little confused because they thought that Colonel Wyatt and I were saying two different things about the ability of the government to send refugees back to their homeland. And we're not. We're actually saying the same thing. We just say it a little bit differently, but the message is still the same. And I forgot how Colonel Wyatt says it. But the long and short of it is this. Guys, if you come over as a refugee, there is a principle that we have adopted into immigration law, into our adoption of the United Nations refugee policies, everything that we have taken on to be our law with refugee programs. It is called the non-refoulement principle. And what this means is we do not send refugees back to their homeland unless, and here's the caveat, we deem that there is no longer a well-founded fear of future persecution. So if your argument is that the government is persecuting me because of my race, let's just say for sake of argument that you come over here as a refugee and 3 months into your stay here, there is a massive coup and a change of government and your ethnic group now becomes the ruling majority. All of, the persecution has been stopped and they've come out on the national stage and said that it's stopped, et cetera, you get my point. Then you can be returned to your native country. But our government has to determine that that well-founded fear of future persecution no longer exists, okay? I hope that makes sense. But now the other thing, that remember, and I'll put it on the screen, you could look at USCIS's website, if you come as a refugee, after 1 year of being here as a refugee, you must... You also saw that dog hair flying around? It was on this side of the camera. Sorry, I have serious ADD. But you must apply and become a lawful permanent resident, LPR. That's what we call your green card. That's what you hear referred to as your green card. Then you are no longer a refugee. So this idea of the persecution continuing to exist in your homeland, that is no longer an issue. The conditions can fundamentally change inside Africa, and you will not be returned because you are now a lawful permanent resident. You have that status. Where the fear comes in, and this is Colonel Wyatt's saying in his video about the 140 race laws and things like that, they would have to be overturned. And there's a bunch of things that in our reasonable, rational mind, we would agree would have to be overturned or disappear inside Africa for us to really believe the persecution is stopped. However, let's also be realistic here. Let's just say for sake of argument that the Democrats take power of the executive in the next swing of elections. Whoever is going to run, since President Trump is term limited out, the Republican loses, and you get a leftist in office. There is broad discretion from the executive, and you've seen it, and I've talked about this in many previous videos, where the executive can just simply stop a refugee program. And the executive has a lot of discretion on whether or not DHS, USCIS, all the other alphabet soups, DOJ that deal with refugees, USRAP, still consider there to be a well-founded fear of future persecution. So I'm telling you, and again, this is just my analysis, you can disagree, if a leftist does come to power during the next presidential cycle, I'm almost 100% convinced they will end the Africana refugee program, and they will attempt to return people who are still on refugee status. Right? No longer LPRs, but refugees. And they'll simply say, this was all made up by the Republicans and the Trump administration. There is no persecution. Look, here's Ramaphosa, or here's whoever the president of South Africa at the moment is. Is there persecution? No, there's no persecution. And it'll just disappear because our government can do, the executive can do that with the broad discretion they have over refugee programs and the whole immigration system. So I don't think the argument that saying, we know they're never going to get rid of the 140 some odd race-based laws, all of that. But I don't think they have to. I just think you need a leftist administration to declare there's no well-founded fear of future persecution. And then and only then could, and I say could, it doesn't mean they would, but could those people who are still on refugee status be returned to South Africa. So that's one issue. Now, again, as you see, we're coming up on year 2 of Trump's administration, so there's still plenty of time, and that 1 year window of when you get here to becoming an LPR, most of you who come during the Trump administration will not have to deal with this problem, right? So don't worry about that. So if you get here, if you come within the next couple of months, and you make you're an LPR, it doesn't matter if a leftist takes over the next administration and wants to review refugees, Africana refugees. You are no longer a refugee, you are a lawful permanent resident, and therefore you cannot be returned if the leftist administration says that there is no longer a well-founded fear of future persecution. What the Trump administration is doing with this is not looking at the conditions, the country conditions of where these refugees came from, in my opinion, because of what I just told you. Most of these Biden-era refugees are now lawful permanent residents. And by the way, yes, there is precedent where the executive can revoke lawful permanent residency and even denaturalize people, but for severe reasons, not for the previous administration made a fake refugee program. They wouldn't punish the people because of that, in my opinion. What we're talking about is the point we're going to get to. What the Trump administration is looking at with these 250,000 previous refugees is, do they all fit all of the requirements of a refugee? And Colonel Wyatt brought this up, meaning, did they lie on their application? Are they national security threats? Are they criminals? Right? All of these things that would have disqualified them, that the Biden administration, in the corruption of the entire immigration, asylum, refugee system that existed during the Biden administration, turned their heads, looked the other way. And that is what the Trump administration is really trying to do with immigration reform, is remove criminals and dangerous people from our country who never deserved to be here to begin with, but probably lied and slipped through the cracks. So the review is not to return refugees who genuinely came here seeking refuge under a viable, legitimate U.S. program. The point, in my opinion, of looking at this Reuters article and what I've heard about the memo is to see if there are dangerous people who lied on their applications or came here and then proceeded to commit crimes and become criminals. So remember that, one, this review of refugees has nothing to do with Afrikaners. It's Biden-era refugees. For you as Afrikaners, in the current Trump refugee program, what it might be a canary in the coal mine for is what happens with the next administration. So you do have to be aware that the next administration, of course, could end the program, could deem the conditions to have changed, and could return people who are still currently refugees. However, most of you who come during the Trump administration will no longer be refugees at that point. This is also assuming that the Democrats and the left take the executive branch during the next presidential cycle, which is also not guaranteed. So there's a lot of what ifs here. So why worry about something that's not even an issue yet? And this, the real thing you've got to remember is once you become that lawful permanent resident, the non-refoulement issue, the changed conditions, or our government's perception of conditions in South Africa no longer means anything. So don't worry about that. You would only have to worry if you lied on your application. For example, you had a criminal record, you hid something from the government, one of those bars to a refugee program, you somehow slipped through the cracks, but it applied to you. That's what the Trump administration is looking for with this, and that's what they're trying to dig for. So Colonel Wyatt did a great review of it. I love this analysis. I'm just, piggybacking off of that because I got asked the same questions. But it is a good window into what could happen if an administration changes. But again, once you're an LPR, you're no longer a refugee, so it doesn't matter what our government thinks happens in South Africa. So don't worry about that. Don't fret about that. But as always, remember to like, subscribe, share, and I'll see you for the next video.